When white supremacists start turning on each other, you know the empire's crumbling from within. Nick Fuentes and Eric Orville were once allies, but now their so-called pro-white unity is falling apart in real time. And trust me, this feud exposes way more than just hurt egos. Recently, a noticeable rift emerged between Eric Orville and Nick Fuentes, a fallout that's been drawing attention across social media platforms. Especially on Twitter, Eric Orville, the founder of a movement called Return to the Land, RTTL, leads a group that promotes the creation of isolated white-only communities. Their settlements are reportedly being developed in rural areas of Arkansas, Missouri, and possibly Idaho, far from urban centers. The group's ideology is deeply exclusionary. They openly state that non-white individuals are not welcome. Their message is blunt and unapologetic, summed up in slogans that make their racial bias unmistakable. Despite the disturbing nature of RTTL's beliefs, the movement has been gaining followers and financial support. Orville has also collaborated with other figures in extremist circles, including Nick Fuentes, a well-known white nationalist. At first, their alliance seemed strong. Orville frequently praised Fuentes online, even joking that RTTL judged an applicant's whiteness by comparing their photo to Fuentes's. If they looked as white or whiter, they were accepted. However, that alliance didn't last. Recently, Orville publicly distanced himself from Fuentes, marking a major split between the two. The timing is notable. Fuentes, once largely deplatformed, has been re-emerging in more mainstream online spaces and expanding his audience. Following the death of conservative figure Charlie Kirk, Fuentes' influence has only grown, making his public image more complex than ever. Now, Orville appears determined to call Fuentes out, exposing what he views as hypocrisy or betrayal. The tension between the two serves as a window into the internal fractures and rivalries within extremist movements, even among those who once shared the same ideology.
Apparently, I am now dead to Nick Fuentes. He says he will never help me again, and he says that no one else should help me either. This is because I privately DM'd him, asking for clarification on his stance on birthright citizenship. A clip was going around where he seemed to endorse birthright citizenship.
At one point, Eric Orville confronted Nick Fuentes over a statement Fuentes had made online that had sparked widespread attention within certain extremist circles. Orville's approach was direct but framed with a veneer of civility. He reached out to Fuentes with a clear purpose: to clarify, challenge, and hold him accountable for his words. Orville essentially asked, "Nick, I saw your comments on social media regarding non-white people and their eligibility for U.S. citizenship. Can you explain exactly what you meant by that?" This moment was more than just a routine exchange between two figures in the white nationalist ecosystem. It represented a clash of ideology, strategy, and personal identity within a broader, highly fractious movement. From the evidence of Orville's own statements and the trajectory of his work with Return to the Land, RTTL, it is apparent that he himself adheres to a hardline, racially exclusive view of citizenship. Orville's worldview is tightly bound to the notion that the United States is a nation fundamentally defined by white identity. For him, non-white individuals, regardless of their birthplace, do not belong in this vision of the country. His initiatives, particularly the development of all-white rural communities in states like Arkansas, Missouri, and parts of Idaho, reflect this belief in practical terms. These are spaces where non-white people are explicitly unwelcome, both socially and legally within the informal community rules. Orville's perspective is thus deeply aligned with a broader subset of white supremacist thought, particularly those factions influenced by Protestant extremism, which historically interweaves religious doctrine with racial exclusivity. The Protestant influence in many white supremacist movements cannot be overstated. While Protestantism itself is diverse and varied, certain extremist offshoots have historically adopted an exclusivist worldview, framing whiteness as divinely sanctioned and inherently linked to cultural and spiritual superiority. This framework often positions non-white populations as outsiders to the moral and civic order of the nation. Orville's rhetoric, his community-building efforts, and his alignment with these ideas position him squarely within this ideological tradition. By contrast, Fuentes, as a practicing Roman Catholic, approaches the same questions with a fundamentally different theological lens, even if he participates in some overlapping white nationalist circles. Catholicism, particularly in its global institutional form, emphasizes universality, inclusivity, and the spiritual equality of all people as children of God. This creates an intrinsic tension between Fuentes' faith and the rigid racial hierarchies promoted by figures like Orval. In the confrontation, Orval escalated the challenge by sending Fuentes a video clip of him making the very statements in question. The tactic was both strategic and confrontational. By providing tangible evidence, Orval forced Fuentes to reconcile his words with his beliefs and alliances. The clip served as a mirror, reflecting potential contradictions or inconsistencies in Fuentes' public stance. This was not merely a casual provocation, it was a calculated move designed to test Fuentes' ideological consistency, while simultaneously signaling to the broader community that Orval was willing to hold even high-profile figures accountable. Such confrontations are relatively rare in extremist networks, where public appearances often emphasize solidarity and cohesion, even when internal disagreements simmer beneath the surface. Orval's challenge also highlights a broader dynamic within these movements: the tension between personal belief, religious doctrine, and strategic messaging. Fuentes' statement that non-white individuals born in the United States deserve citizenship appears on the surface to contradict the exclusivist goals of white nationalist groups. Yet, when examined through the lens of his Catholic faith, this stance is not entirely inconsistent. Catholicism is a religion with a global reach, encompassing communities across every continent, particularly in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Its doctrine emphasizes that all human beings, regardless of race or nationality, are inherently equal before God. By framing his support for birthright citizenship in religious terms, Fuentes can maintain theological consistency while still navigating the political realities of white nationalist discourse. However, this creates a profound disconnect with figures like Orval, who operate in a framework that prioritizes racial purity above theological considerations. The exchange between Orval and Fuentes also exposes the fragility of alliances within extremist communities. While these groups often present a united front publicly, their internal relationships are frequently marked by suspicion, competition, and opportunism. Orval's willingness to directly challenge Fuentes contrasts with the tendency of many white nationalist networks to prioritize appearances over accountability. The confrontation illustrates how personal ambition, media visibility, and ideological nuances can collide, destabilizing even seemingly cohesive alliances. For Orval, the stakes are not merely philosophical. They are practical, tied to the credibility of his movement and the trust of his followers. By questioning Fuentes, he signals that ideological purity and consistency matter, at least within his own vision of white nationalist organizing. Furthermore, this episode underscores the complex role of media and digital platforms in shaping modern extremist discourse. Fuentes has cultivated a significant online presence, leveraging social media and streaming platforms to build his audience and influence. Orval's decision to confront him through these same channels highlights how digital tools facilitate not only outreach and recruitment, but also intra-movement accountability and conflict. The clip Orval shared functioned as a digital record, a form of evidence that could be replayed, analyzed, and critiqued by followers and detractors alike. In this sense, the confrontation is emblematic of a new era in which ideological disputes are increasingly public, performative, and mediated through technology. Beyond the immediate personalities involved, the Orval-Fuentes exchange reveals broader questions about the limits of white nationalist ideology. Orval's position, grounded in racial exclusivity, cannot accommodate the globalized and inclusive ethos of Catholicism that Fuentes claims as part of his identity. This ideological friction illustrates a central tension in contemporary white supremacist movements: the difficulty of maintaining doctrinal cohesion across individuals with differing religious backgrounds, strategic priorities, and personal ambitions. The result is predictable: fractures, infighting, and the continual realignment of allegiances. As Orval's actions demonstrate, when foundational principles are challenged, even by allies, conflict becomes inevitable. Finally, the confrontation sheds light on the broader social and political implications of these movements. By scrutinizing figures like Fuentes through the lens of their own stated principles, Orval not only exposes inconsistencies, but also forces public reflection on the compatibility of extremist ideology with religious belief, civic norms, and moral reasoning. For observers outside these networks, This exchange offers a rare glimpse into the internal mechanics of white nationalist organizing, the debates, contradictions, and personal dynamics that shape the rhetoric and actions of these groups. It is a reminder that extremism is rarely monolithic. Even within movements defined by exclusionary ideologies, individuals navigate competing pressures, ethical dilemmas, and the public gaze. In conclusion, the confrontation between Eric Orval and Nick Fuentes over statements about non-white citizenship is emblematic of deeper ideological, religious, and strategic tensions within white nationalist circles. Orval's hardline exclusionary perspective clashes with Fuentes' Catholic-informed inclusivity, revealing contradictions and sparking public scrutiny. By sending Fuentes a clip of his statements, Orval forced a reckoning with these contradictions, exposing the fragility and contentious nature of alliances within extremist movements. This episode illustrates how personal belief, religious doctrine, and digital media intersect to shape contemporary white nationalist discourse, offering a rare window into the ideological battles that occur not just between these groups and the wider society, but within their own ranks as well.
The fact that Nick Fuentes is part of a religion that is all-encompassing, umbrella religion, and a very welcoming and open religion. Catholicism is basically the branch of Christianity that has been designed to win over all, to be welcoming to all. And that is why you have the Pope constantly, making outreach in various nations with various races. It's because this belief of a common human community that everyone is equal, and not equal on all measures, but that ultimately everyone is a child of God.
Eric Orval's frustration with Nick Fuentes centers on a fundamental disagreement over who deserves citizenship in the United States. Orval frames it as our country, our tax dollars, our government, our military, our empire, implying that citizenship should be reserved for white Americans. Fuentes, however, has a very different perspective. In a clip he shared, Fuentes states plainly, "I don't care what race you are. If you were born in America, you deserve citizenship." This is exactly what puts Orval at odds with him. From Orval's white supremacist viewpoint, any acknowledgement that non-white individuals can claim full citizenship is anathema. But Fuentes' stance is shaped by his Roman Catholic faith, which diverges sharply from the worldview of most Protestant-aligned white supremacists. Catholicism, unlike many Protestant traditions, is designed to be universal, a faith that embraces people across races and nations. Historically, Protestantism has been tied to white European settlers in America and often carries exclusive racial narratives. Catholicism, by contrast, teaches that all humans are children of God and promotes outreach to communities worldwide. The Pope's global engagement, the presence of vibrant Catholic communities in Africa, Louisiana, and elsewhere, and the religion's overall inclusivity exemplify this universality. Fuentes' position on citizenship therefore aligns with his Catholic beliefs. Saying that birthright applies to all Americans isn't just a political stance. It reflects the broader, inclusive teachings of his faith. Protestant supremacists, in contrast, cannot reconcile racial exclusivity with their religion, and therefore reject such openness. When Orval pressed Fuentes privately about his position on birthright citizenship, Fuentes responded directly. He explained that he had already publicly declared his pro-white stance in conversations with other media figures, including Tucker Carlson, emphasizing, "We need to be pro-white. We need to talk about white people. I am pro-white, yet." He simultaneously maintains that anyone born in America, regardless of race, has a legitimate claim to citizenship, a position that sits uncomfortably with Orval's rigid racial framework. When Nick Fuentes addressed the controversy, his response only deepened the divide. He expressed frustration that other white nationalists, including Eric Orval, weren't rallying behind him. Fuentes felt betrayed, insisting that even after appearing on Orval's show and maintaining cordial relations, he was being attacked by people who should have been allies. In his defense, Fuentes attempted to clarify his earlier statements about citizenship, claiming that when he referred to citizens, he wasn't endorsing birthright citizenship. According to him, that principle should go without saying as illegitimate. But this response sidestepped the core issue entirely. Rather than addressing Orval's direct criticism, Fuentes shifted focus to accuse Orval of backstabbing him, a tactic that exposed the cracks within their ideological circle. The truth, however, is that Fuentes contradicted himself. In his earlier remarks, he had clearly said he didn't care about someone's race. If they were born in America, they deserved citizenship. He even acknowledged that saying this might land him in trouble. But once challenged by Orval, he changed his tune, attacking his former ally instead of standing by his words. This pattern isn't new among extremist groups. White supremacists frequently turn on one another when ideological purity is questioned. We've seen similar feuds before. Take Nick Fuentes and Charlie Kirk, for example. The two clashed bitterly, largely over their opposing stances on Israel and Palestine. Kirk was staunchly pro-Israel, while Fuentes was not. Now, the conflict between Orval and Fuentes follows a similar pattern, but with birthright citizenship at the center. For Fuentes, his Catholic faith creates a theological contradiction he cannot escape. Catholicism is a global religion, deeply rooted in Africa, Latin America, and across diverse non-white communities. It teaches that all people are children of God. So, while Fuentes promotes white nationalist rhetoric, his religious identity forces him into a paradox. He cannot claim loyalty to a faith that preaches universal belonging while denying citizenship based on race. Ultimately, their feud reveals something deeper about the instability of extremist ideologies. When not directed outward, that hostility turns inward. History shows that European and white supremacist movements often fracture from within. Rivalries and purges replacing unity once external enemies fade. As one might say, when no one else is left to target, they inevitably target each other. This new level of visibility, the clout these white nationalist content creators are gaining, is creating a volatile dynamic. Rather than sticking to a clear agenda or their so-called mission, they're increasingly turning on each other. As Phil Scott has pointed out, the infighting is already underway. They're competing for the spotlight, vying for views, subscribers, and attention. Personal animosity fuels the conflict even more than ideology. Nick Fuentes, for example, seems primarily focused on clicks and social media traction. He will say one thing to gain attention and then retract or shift positions as needed. His Catholic identity adds another layer of tension. Roman Catholicism by nature emphasizes inclusivity and universality, a stance that alienates white Protestant supremacists who want a faith that justifies racial exclusivity. These Protestant groups often view themselves as the chosen white community, insisting that even religion must reinforce their racial dominance. This worldview drives movements like Eric Orval's, where all white communities are being created in Missouri, Arkansas, and similar rural areas. In these enclaves, non-white people, even those born in the US, are considered outsiders. For Black Americans like myself, these beliefs are starkly exclusionary. White supremacists argue that ancestry determines where someone belongs, effectively rejecting the rights of anyone outside their narrowly defined racial group, regardless of birthplace. As these internal conflicts escalate, it's clear that the white supremacist movement is fracturing from within. Phil Scott's advice resonates. The best strategy for Black people, and anyone outside these extremist circles, is to stay out of their disputes. Let them fight among themselves, because when left unchecked, their infighting will only intensify. That wraps up another episode of Celebrity Drunk. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, subscribe and hit the bell for updates.